How far did your mother desert you? Larry asked me straight out after my mother's burial. I couldn't believe he said that without even showing me any sympathy. He must have thought the inheritance was already in my account after seeing me with the bank book. But that was just terrible as a human being. It is almost $2 million. I just said, $2 million. The sneer that had unnerved me returned to Larry. After taxes, $100,000 should be left over. I wasn't pleased with his reaction. His sardonic smirk made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what he had in store, but I knew that tomorrow would not be beneficial for him. Larry immediately began his plan, but his rash choices would prove to be costly. He just didn't realize it yet. My name is Sarah Taylor. I got married in an arranged marriage when I was 19. My husband is Larry, and he works for a company. He's 3 years older than me and the oldest son in the Owen family. However, his younger brother Frank left the family after graduating from college and hasn't spoken to anyone since, even though he is known as the oldest son. My parents-in-law loved Larry and treated him like an only child as a result. Honestly, I didn't want to marry Larry even though my mother's family had run a business for many years. Since I was in a position where I couldn't argue with my parents' decision, I ultimately married Larry. Additionally, he was unable to refuse the marriage because his father was in business. Love was not the foundation of our marriage. The marriage wasn't pleasant at all. Unfortunately, we were unable to have children because we married young. Although it was difficult to accept that we couldn't have children, I believed that having a kid would improve our situation. But even with hospital visits, it didn't happen. Hey, barren women, take care of the chores first. My parents-in-law, who had earlier treated me well as a young lady, started calling me a barren woman after a few years. After all, you should be able to do it. If you only follow the directions, going to the hospital is a waste of money. Larry never stood up for me when my father-in-law said terrible things to me every day. While my in-laws chastised me, he would either read the newspaper or sleep and snore. Even when I told him that I wanted to change and wanted to work, he would still say this: "If you go to work, people won't let me leave the house because they'll think we're struggling." After marriage, women often took care of the home. However, I must admit that living with my mother-in-law by myself was a nightmare. Every day, I wouldn't receive any help. I was unable to tell my parents or escape because our marriage depended on our employment. Still, I earnestly endured daily suffering in the hope that it would eventually be rewarded. But no matter how many years passed, the condition never got better. 19 years ago, we were married. When I was 43 years old, my father-in-law died in an accident. The incident led to the discovery that his company was avoiding taxes. The back taxes and penalties depleted our assets. When the company declared bankruptcy, our property was seized. We kept the house, but we had to give up our comfortable way of life. I thought it would be challenging for Larry, who was 45 at the time, to find a new job, but my parents found him one. He was able to find work quickly as a result, but my mother-in-law grew old quickly and died of exhaustion. She didn't even have the energy to treat me badly, which pleased me. After that, she had a stroke and needed care. With this, I honestly stopped believing that I would ever have children. Even though I was already 43 and kind of giving up, this was the real turning point for me to let go. As if it were natural, Larry pushed his mother's concern on me. On his days off, Larry would unwind just as he had in the past. "I hope you will help take care of your mother." I occasionally worked up the courage to tell him one day, even if it was just for one meal or on his days off. If he could help, it would mean so much to me. But Larry frowned and said something. "I'm at work, I see. Let me unwind on my days off." Larry just didn't seem to understand. "You wouldn't precisely cancel my days." When Larry's father's business failed, my folks started to worry about me. Finally, they said something. Go back home, but his mother would suffer if I left. We now have a caretaker. I can't imagine having the money to hire someone to clean this home once a week instead of daily. Even if I received unfair treatment, I couldn't abandon her. It was just not in my nature to do that. After a while, Larry started to leave the house early. Even on his days off, he said, if he relaxed at home, he felt uncomfortable. He started saying something that I heard the neighbors say. My wife is the reason I can't even relax at home. On my days off, he began going out alone, and although the neighbors knew his mother required care, they acted as though he had left. All of the care he showed me displayed that he didn't care what other people thought of him. It was painful to watch him disregard his mother, who loved Larry when he was ill. Sometimes she would say, "It's because you're here that Larry won't come." But if I asked if I should leave, she would cut me off mid-sentence. The long period of caring came to an end when my mother-in-law died after another 19 years and was reunited with her husband. It was my 41st birthday. I had come to terms with a lot of things, but I was no longer in love with Larry. I would probably spend my entire life here, and it didn't seem feasible for me to leave. Even after he reached retirement age, Larry's diligence was clear. He was invited to stay on as a senior employee. This has allowed me to live the way I do. I am thankful that we were never close couples. Larry never tried to get a divorce from me, even though we had issues in our marriage. His opinion is probably that it is too late now. He still enjoys leaving the house on his days off, so I've learned to value my alone time. I've even taken up pottery as a hobby. I've made pals at this age, and I'm having fun for the first time since getting married. This, however, seems to have annoyed Larry. "I'm working, and you're out playing," he replied. One day, he even burned my backpack. After I used the bag for my pottery class, Larry set it on fire in the yard. "What are you doing?" He suggested cleaning the house rather than getting caught in odd hobbies. My pottery supplies and my pouch were still in the bag. Even dousing it with water was too late. It turned to ashes. I was furious. I thought it was too late to change anything, even though I still had a long life to live. I thought about obtaining a divorce, but while I was considering it, something else bad happened. My parents passed away suddenly. A month after my father's premature death from an illness, my mother too fell ill and passed away. Everything occurred so fast, and I was devastated. My brother Jack had already taken over my father's business because so many people attended his funerals and then mine. I lay in bed for about a week after that. It must have been mental exhaustion. I was teased by Larry, who said, "My friends from the pottery class were nice enough to check on me. How long are you going to sleep?" I was also worn out after Mom's burial, but I didn't get much rest. You must enjoy not having to work and being able to sleep as much as you like. It may have been a valid point, but hearing it from a husband to his wife was really distressing. The day after, I forced myself to get up and return to my usual routine because I could no longer afford to indulge in my interests. Larry appeared to be content with his simple life and unconcerned with how I felt. Sometime after the funeral of my mother, I remembered that the funeral home's payment deadline was approaching, so I looked at the bank book. Jack was busy at work, so I agreed to pay him on his behalf. But when Larry saw that I was carrying the bank book, he came over and smiled mischievously. "In that case, how much did your mother inherit?" I was shocked by what he said. He said this right after my mother's funeral, without showing any concern for me. He might have thought the inheritance had been deposited when he saw me looking at the bank book. But for a person, that is unthinkable. I responded with $2 million, as was appropriate. With a vicious smirk, he continued, "That's it. After taxes, $100,000 should be left over." What a dreadful smile. I didn't know what Larry was thinking, but I knew without talking to him that things wouldn't work out for him. Silently, I put the bank book aside, finally catching the vibe. Larry spoke louder. "It's been challenging for you. You should go to bed early today." Maybe because he was uncomfortable and didn't want to make me happy, Larry didn't say pleasant things to me too often. It made me sick. The last thing I wanted to see was his face. As a result, I went to bed early that day. But the next day, after breakfast, something unexpected happened. Larry went out to work as normal, but I got a call to let me know that he had not shown up for work. I was surprised because this had never happened before. They believed it might have been an accident. I tried calling Larry right away, but couldn't get through. I was restless and paced around. I walked into the living room and everything made sense. On the table in the living room was a piece of paper. The divorce paperwork was previously filled out by Larry. When I first noticed it, I looked at where I'd left the bank book the day before and thought, no way. As I expected, the bank book was gone. I mumbled and moaned. Nothing was an accident. Larry had probably disappeared on his own. I had thought he was in the living room doing something that morning. By stealing those items, he must be getting ready to start over without me. I had never been evicted by Larry before because he was waiting for my parents' fortune. The stolen bank book was enough proof. Notwithstanding this realization, I remained calm. There was no need for panic. I filled out the divorce papers meticulously and brought them to the city office. The seeds had been sown for Larry's own downfall. I assumed he knew there would be no remorse. I called Larry's workplace and properly said that I couldn't get through to him either, so it doesn't seem like an accident. I'm sorry for any difficulty, and I'll let you know as soon as I get in touch. The employer indicated they would regard it as paid leave for the day and wished Larry well, which made me envious of his excellent workplace. My parents had, after all, started the company. I had thought he would be honest with his employer, but now he would be a complete stranger to me. I was able to publish the divorce form correctly after a lot of effort. I'm amazed at how fast I was set free. I wondered if my life would have been different if I had gotten a divorce sooner. As I was getting my things together, my phone rang. Since Larry hadn't returned my calls before I knew what he would say, I ignored it and carried on packing. And yet the phone rang and rang. Even the foam in the house started to ring after a while. It was so annoying that I reluctantly answered it, assuming it was Larry. "Hello?" I said. Yes, informally. On the other end was Larry's desperate voice. "Yes, I had heard that you hadn't shown up for work, so I called. You should contact your employer immediately. Right now, it isn't the issue." Larry shouted for me to halt. "I cannot withdraw the funds." I burst out laughing as soon as I heard his voice. Finally, he realized. I figured he must not have recognized because he took the bank book quickly. "I take it you don't remember my ID? Remember how I had it in my pottery class backpack?" As I answered, I chuckled. Larry sounded nervous. "This ID doesn't." It was exhausting. "I don't know." "After the passing of your mother, I repeatedly asked you to take care of the paperwork. When I went to the bank, they informed me that the treatment could not be performed since I did not have the hair. So the bank hook stayed the same with barely a few dollars left." "Don't be silly. You have to make the proper arrangements for someone who is no longer here. Yes, keep in mind that you said you would deal with it eventually. You shouldn't blame me." "So what am I supposed to do with this bank book?" As previously stated, unless I go to finish the paperwork, there is nothing I can do about it. I didn't feel like answering, so I kept quiet while Larry went on his tirade impatiently. Larry seemed to have gone back to the bank teller and explained the situation. I accidentally burned the ID. Does nothing need to be done? Maybe by proxy. Look, I'm on the phone with my wife right now. I could also hear the teller's agitated voice, so I assume he placed it on speaker. I asked him what he'd said. "Larry, what are you talking about? You realize that you can't do that as a stranger." "Yes, exactly. The divorce paperwork was handled appropriately just now because of your preparation. Farewell." I finished the call after saying what I wanted to say. I must have just said something that the bank teller heard. By now, Larry must be either pale from shock or scarlet with wrath. The idea made me laugh. I knew that, before he returned, I had to leave the house. With that notion, then I quickly packed up my things and left the house. I was heading to the ancient house my family had left behind after my parents passed away. I, too, had inherited that house. My mother amassed $15 million in assets from running her firm. However, It wouldn't be safe to inherit a large sum of money if Larry found out because we didn't have children. As a result, I inherited over $2 million, barely enough to cover my living expenses. The rest was the family home, my mother's immaculately preserved dresses, and my father's antiques. If these heirlooms were appraised, their value would be enormous. With my brother Jack's consent, I arranged this agreement. Since he had moved out after getting married, Jack was worried that the family home would be empty. He had children and had taken over the business, so he was pleased to inherit just the money. The discussions about inheritance were resolved amicably. After arriving at the family's home, after I divorced Larry, I informed Jack that I would be moving there. "Oh," he replied, "if you intend to live in the family home, it is a relief that it won't be empty. But do you really feel at ease about Larry's divorce?" "Sarah?" "Yes," I replied. "We don't have any children, and both of our parents have passed away. If we both want a divorce, that's best for us. I want to start over and have no regrets. It would have been awful if I had been Larry's servant all my life, but Jack was worried that I would be left alone. In addition, I would be content to spend my last days at this house where I had many family memories, even if I were by myself." Larry contacted me frequently after that, but he never paid me a visit because he didn't anticipate my being at the family home. That day, I had a quiet day. The house felt lonely without a family, but I was very happy. The day after, I finally plucked up the courage to go deposit money. It was a little tricky to retrieve the bank book from Larry. I decided to go at about 5 in the morning, figuring Larry would be asleep. As soon as I got home and opened the front door, the smell of alcohol attacked me. I had to grimace since it smelled so awful. Entering the living area, there were beer cans everywhere. My ripped bank book was left on the table. This is terrible. Regardless of your level of rage, tearing up someone's bank book in this manner is just unacceptable. I gathered up the pieces and put them in my backpack. I also took some clothes and went back to my family's residence. After that, I headed to the bank. I was approaching the door. Someone cried out to Sarah. Larry was the one who had been waiting for me. I noticed that the bank book was missing, so I assumed you would come here. Whether or not I come here is none of your concern. I said, don't bring up the fact that we've been dating for a while. Even after the divorce was official, he kept speaking in this way. I ignored him and went into the bank. I firmly refused Larry's repeated attempts to talk to me. That's when it happened. "Brother, isn't that Sarah?" Someone said. "Why are you here, Frank?" It was Larry's brother, Frank. Larry and I were both surprised to see him. We hardly ever saw Frank, usually only at funerals. This was probably my third run-in with Frank. I had been married to Larry for about 43 years. His parents, worried about the reputation of their company, begged him to at least attend important family events, even though he wanted to keep his distance from them. We had met at my mother-in-law's funeral a few years earlier, so he probably knew who we were. "I'm here for Mom's estate inheritance, but I'll check the balance and let you know too." Larry's eyes brightened. Frank said, "I was surprised too. I thought there were only a few dollars left in the bank account." However, according to Frank, there were also long-standing investment trusts and safety deposit boxes that were rented while their father was alive. Frank's mother had informed him about it before she passed away. She had said in her message to him, "If anything happens, you take care of it." However, his busy life had forced him to wait this long to act. Frank shot me and Larry a pitying glance. There was a letter and several gems in the safety deposit box. Sarah should get her whole fortune, according to Mom. I was shocked by Frank's comments, but Larry seemed much more shocked. Frank pulled out a letter from among his papers. I knew what the stationery was because I had bought it for my mother-in-law. The letter was very clear that all of the jewelry in the safety deposit box, along with other assets, should be given to me, her daughter-in-law. Sarah. I could see my mother-in-law writing it very carefully. I remembered that when I asked her whether she needed the letter, she had given me an icy response. "It has nothing to do with you." Maybe she was going to compose this letter. In the past, I covered my lips in surprise. Sarah, you've been managing everything by yourself, Frank said. Despite her nasty remarks, my mother-in-law expressed regret and asked me to oversee the inheritance. She knew that if she told Larry, he would probably try to remain silent beside me. Larry started to shake, and his cheeks turned red. All right. I never intended to inherit anything as legal heir. I thought I had to handle it. You should be fine since you only need to change the name to Sarah. That's right. Larry, this was remarked casually by Frank, who had no idea that we were divorcing. Later, they called me to the bank desk. Larry waited in a lobby, unable to follow and lacking the motivation to do so. That day, I completed the bank book reissue and the transfer to the funeral home. I'll go ahead now. Sarah, I will respond to you. I left Larry and myself in the bank, Frank said. I arrived home without incident. In a follow-up email, Frank informed me that Larry had protested, saying the letter was invalid, but Frank convinced him to honor his mother's wishes. Not enough, though, to win Larry over. Frank asked a lawyer for free legal advice. The letter was not a will, but the lawyer suggested that dealing by phone would be cheaper than hiring a lawyer. Larry agreed to inherit the house. Larry reluctantly surrendered the investment trusts and the jewels, which were worthless. Thus, officially, I received my mother-in-law's estate. If Sarah gets Mom's belongings, I should get that for my mother-in-law, you know. Larry argued with the lawyer, but that was a different matter. It was embarrassing. The attorney even chastised him. Larry finally found me at the family home and knocked on my door because he couldn't stand it any longer. I was wrong. Let's start afresh, he begged. When he realized he would get nothing, he kneeled at the door and pleaded for reconciliation. Start over. First of all, we never loved one another. What's the purpose of starting over? I had the freedom to voice my thoughts. I finally told Larry how I'd been feeling. He fell silent as though for the first time he was remorseful for his actions, and I couldn't help but smile. At least you still have the house. Have you communicated with your boss? If you're so desperate for money, you better work hard to keep your job. When I stated that and closed the door, it was finally over. The bank book contained our mother's assets, and I could live comfortably with them moving forward. Larry continued to leave work without informing his employer, which finally led to his discharge, despite my warnings about his lack of enthusiasm for his job. Maybe he put in a lot of effort to maintain his honor instead of going out of duty. Now that he had no one to show his dignity to and was missing the easy money he had expected to receive, it wouldn't be shocking if he felt he had lost his purpose in life. All I had to worry about was someone I'd known for years. I had no desire to help him. I truly apologize for any inconvenience I may have given you. Sarah, it's terribly regrettable. Frank claimed that Larry was the only one who expressed regret and assured him that I would no longer have to deal with him. Recognizing the family's issues early on, Frank was probably happy with his life and not associated with that household because he had left home when he was a little boy. Larry had become a loner, though he was old enough to probably live on his pension. He should start over, but his willpower showed some strength. My friends were overjoyed to see me return, and I began attending pottery classes. I didn't realize how enjoyable spending some time alone might be until I took the ceramics class. I found a lovely lady despite my pledge not to get married. Being with someone who loves me could be another source of happiness. It may be better to accept new students than to be an alumnus forever. Perhaps it's too late. However, like with a divorce, it's never too late. As long as they are living, everybody can find happiness, regardless of age. I believe so.